Hachette Audio presents Our Dear Miss H is on the Case. Written by Violet Marsh. Read by Marisa Carlin. To Uncle Dee and Gary, who took me to the Carnegie Museums of Pittsburgh and helped foster my love for history and objets d'art from the past. Chapter 1. Essex, late 1750s. Gad, is that actual gold in this mud trap of yours? Miss Georgina Harrington instantly recognized the jovial voice of her most tolerable living relative, Percy Pendergrast. Glancing up, she could espy only her cousin's handsome face peering over the lip of the 6-foot-deep pit that she was currently kneeling inside. Knowing Percy, he was standing as far back from the overturned dirt as possible. I told you that my father was right about antiquities being hidden inside this mound, Georgina shouted back. Her own words triggered a bitter sweetness that lanced her euphoric bubble. After years of waiting and still more years of fruitlessly moving dirt, she'd finally accomplished her father's dream, their dream. Dear Papa should be sitting next to her, his narrow, scholarly hand sweeping away the debris to reveal these wonderful treasures. But he'd been gone, though, for a decade. You look like you're dusting, Percy observed with a shudder. I still can't fathom why you insist on descending into that dreadful hole and digging in the muck. What is the point, then, of hiring workers? People call me the family's spendthrift, but you simply toss away all your money into this giant abyss that you've half excavated yourself. Tom and Jack, the local chaps whom Georgina had hired to help her shovel, exchanged a glance that she had no trouble deciphering. Clearly, they understood that nothing would keep their eccentric employer away from the mysterious heap of dirt. She wished her own family could comprehend her passion so readily. At least Percy indulged Georgina, if only because of their mutually beneficial arrangement. In exchange for using his name for her antiquity appraisal business, Georgina paid him a small percentage of her commissions, and a slightly bigger one if he needed to appear in person or give a lecture. Although Percy enjoyed the extra pin money, he had no appreciation for the actual historical pieces, except perhaps their beauty. He'd visited Herculaneum on his grand tour, only because it was becoming a fashionable destination. But when Georgina had toured the site with her father and had watched the workers haul out marble statues and jewelry, she'd imagined herself in the middle of the seaside city during its heyday. Percy would never comprehend the utter delight in communing with the past, so Georgina didn't try to explain. Instead, she moved aside in order for her cousin to see what she was so meticulously unearthing. Is that a gilded face? Percy's shoulders and even torso were visible now, as he leaned high above her. Helmet! Georgina gazed adoringly at the perfectly formed nose poking through the dirt. Her heart squeezed with utter joy. Judging from the cheek flap that I already pulled from the ground, I think it is iron covered with thinly hammered gold. I will need to study it more closely, but marvelous designs appear to be etched into the precious metal. A helmet, you say? Another face, this one unfamiliar and undeniably handsome, appeared at the hole above Georgina. With his even features and straight nose, he looked like a statue of Caesar Augustus come to life. Even the sun seemed to recognize the newcomer's male beauty, as it wreathed his head in a warm, brilliant glow. The auburn strands of his hair burnt like fire. Georgina had little use for petty countenances, but her heart suddenly decided to beat in an odd, almost trilling fashion. She would have liked to attribute the irregularity to Percy bringing a stranger to her dig, but it wasn't concern causing her heart to trip. Quickly, Georgina moved to shield her precious find from the interloper. Thieves, both lowborn and highborn, abounded everywhere. They could claim Georgina's discovery as their own, or steal the grave goods to melt down. As if understanding her precaution, Tom and Jack also strategically placed themselves to hide the partially unearthed treasures. Percy, as always, seemed blithely oblivious to their concerns or the need for secrecy. I see you brought a friend. Georgina didn't care that her tone sounded icy. She was icy right now. Even Percy had no trouble understanding the undercurrent in her voice. Oh, you needn't worry about Alexander. He's the loyal sort. Won't tell a soul. He's never gossiped to anyone about the scandalous scrapes that he's seen me get into. How reassuring, Georgina remarked dryly, finding it odd that Percy used Alexander's first name rather than his last one or his title. Percy had never been the formal type, but he generally followed the social edict. Judging by the redhead's style of dress, he was clearly of noble birth. And if he was a good friend of Percy's, he was likely a roguish scoundrel as well. I promise I'm trustworthy, Alexander called, in a warm, genial baritone that had the surprising and exceedingly uncomfortable effect of resonating inside Georgina. Georgina replied, a claim that both an honourable man and rapscallion would make. Instead of being insulted, Alexander threw his head back and laughed. The deep, rich sound rumbled through Georgina, too. I am the former, I swear. Alexander is the loyal sort, and furthermore, he has no interest in English ancestry, Percy teased. Now, if you were hosting secret curricle races, you might have a concern. He is the very devil when he has a set of reins in his hands. Percy is right that I have very little regard for musty old heroes, and even less care for the stuff they left behind. The present is much more engaging. Alexander grinned down and sent her a wink as if they were bosom friends. After living with her half-brother for ages, Georgina didn't trust outward charmers. Their polished veneer often hid rough interiors. She also had little use for men who'd rather risk life and limb on a race to nowhere than spend any time learning the lessons of the past. I see, Georgina said, as she gave him a polite but tight smile. I shall climb into the pit, Percy announced suddenly, as if he were Julius Caesar declaring Vini Vidi Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. Her cousin considered himself an athlete, but Georgina had trouble envisioning him scrambling down the rickety ladder, leaning haphazardly against the wall of dirt. Although Tom and Jack, who had spent time as miners in the western counties, had shored up the sides of the trench with wood, it was a rather amateurish construction. Georgina was not missish about accepting a little peril if it meant touching history, and the men she'd hired had unfortunately endured more perilous jobs than this one. But Percy was pampered. I'll return to the carriage, Alexander announced. Between the ladder, the descent, and the mud at the bottom, it seems a bit too much for me. Some adventurer, Georgina thought, even as she acknowledged that her sardonic assessment was a rather uncharitable one. After all, she'd just been worried about Percy a few moments before. Something about Alexander disrupted her normal, practical bearing, which, in turn, irked her. Yet she felt oddly bereft to see his face disappear from the opening. Could you have found a ghastlier ladder? Percy asked as he leaned down, his normally ruddy cheeks growing pale. Funds are limited, Georgina said crisply. Her father had bequeathed her a small monetary inheritance, along with the cottage and the parcel containing the barrows. It was enough to live on, barely, but her guardian, her half-brother, did not permit Georgina free access to the largesse. To save on expenses, he'd even shut up her father's home and arranged for her to reside with him and his wife on their neighbouring estate. Although the red-bricked manor house was much larger and more elegantly appointed than the 5-bedroom abode, Georgina would have much preferred to live on her own property. Ah! A strangled sound erupted from Percy. He must have accidentally pushed the ladder away from the wall when he'd climbed onto it. The top swayed dangerously in the air with Percy clinging to the first few rungs. Miraculously, her cousin managed to keep the rickety structure upright as he attempted to wobble it back toward the sloped side of the pit. Georgina scrambled to her feet. She, Tom and Jack raced along the planks of wood that they'd laid down to protect the site. Georgina reached her cousin first. Years of wielding a shovel had gifted her with a strength exceedingly unusual among upper-class women.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?